Welcome to this week's Preps Preview alongside Justin Conn. I'm Aren Dow. A lot of games helped maybe muddle the conference title a little bit where the teams who were undefeated, like Sullivan and Taylorville, were then beat. And, I feel like, kind of coming into this week, it's really not any more clear for the conference title than it was a week ago, which is a little strange to see, considering we are going into week 7 here, and we still don't really know, maybe other than Arcola's kind of separating themselves a little bit, but besides that, I feel like it's kind of anyone's up for grabs right now.
I don't know if we know any more now than we did when the season started. We know Arcola's pretty good, and this is the first time we've had it to where we have one undefeated team left. Usually we've had 3 or 4 at this time still undefeated, and it's really kind of a jumble in the middle right now in the area.
Yeah, I know. I went to cover MacArthur. They played Jacksonville, and that was one of those games where you figure, okay, MacArthur's beaten teams who have beaten Jacksonville, and this is going to be a pretty straightforward game. And I just don't think you can look at it that way this season, where there have been so many close games, so many overtime games this season, to where, like Sullivan, lost to St. T, but I don't think that necessarily means St. T will beat Tuscola this week. I feel like a lot of these teams at the top of the conference are very even, and we have about 4 of those games coming up this week that'll help maybe sort that out a little bit more. We'll see. But, kind of going into, we've been doing this for the last 3 weeks or so, our top 5, and I feel like mine has changed drastically each week. And again, mine has changed drastically again. I know we always go through this thing where I don't want to know what your top 5 is, but do you want me to go first? Or?
Yeah, and I also want to say, Hugh Sullivan, our videographer, I would like you to go through into archives and delete our previous top 5s, because I don't want those on record. Those were wrong, the wrong top 5s I brought in that week. This week I have the right top 5, but I do want to hear yours first, Aren.
All right, so 5, and this is a team that I don't think I ranked at all last week. That's Maroa-Forsyth, who came in and had a pretty dominant win against Monticello. I mean, I know that it wasn't like a huge win that you kind of expect that Maroa's had in the last couple of years, but it's still 30-12 for beating a team like Monticello. I thought that was impressive, and sure that there was a little bit of win, but I know that Monticello's more of a passing team, but really impressed with the way that Maroa handled Monticello and holding them to the lowest point total of the season. I know you talked about in the story that Maroa had a lot of people who helped Jack Hockaday get that win, and I feel like I think especially with Maroa that has so many new starters after that huge senior class left, I think you're going to keep having that. And you're starting to see Maroa put these games together where they, after losing close games against St. T and Unity, maybe this will start up a trend here. And 4, I have St. Teresa, which I'm not sure if I had them ranked either in my top 5. But beating Sullivan, Okaw Valley in Sullivan, that's a really nice win. I'll talk about this a little bit in our upcoming games, but Ryan Fike had a really nice fourth quarter to where he was, I think, 8 for 10 in the fourth quarter. It really helped get that drive going. Hit it Patrick Altoff with a touchdown at the end. And what really impressed me is that Zach Jarrett, who has really been the catalyst to that offense and moved the ball so much, he has 66 yards and they still won the game. So that really impressed me. Casey-Westfield have at number 3. They get this kind of a standard win, this big win, and so I have them at number 3. And I feel like you can't learn too much about Casey from here on out. I mean, unless they lose, which I don't think they will. But I think Casey's past that part of their schedule to where they're going to have close games like the Lawrenceville game. Arcola, our only undefeated team left, I have them at number 2 right now. Arcola, and I talked to their coach Zach Zaire a little bit, and he talked about there's just a different team this year to where, instead of, if one thing breaks down, then we don't know what to do, or if Clayton Strader's in the pocket and looking for someone and he doesn't have that first read, he's automatically taking off and running. They're good enough to where that line can protect and he's able to look at that second read, and it's not just if one thing goes wrong, then let's go this direction every time. I mean, they have multiple options on that field, and Wyatt Fischel's so good on offense and defense, and I think you'll start to see Arcola here against Sangamon Valley here coming up. We'll talk about that a little bit, how they stack against a team who has played as well as Sangamon Valley, but for Arcola, it hasn't been close any game, except Arthur. I mean, that's the one close game, and that was still a 20-some-odd point game that they got the win. And then number 1, I have Effingham. And, the Hearts, I didn't really know what to make of them at the start of the season. And I thought, they lost to Breeze Mater Dei, which is a good team. But still, I didn't really, Civic Memorial, and it's like, we're kind of going through the season a little bit. Mascoutah, they got those wins. But to beat Taylorville, who was undefeated the way that they did, Zach Miller has been the guy. Has kind of like St. T. Zach Miller's been the guy for them, and then Travis Durbin has 133 yards in the ground. So they're winning with. I know Billy Arn's a big part of that backfield as well. They have enough running backs to where they can, they just go behind that huge line, and they're able to rack up yards against a team like Taylorville, who's been. They just looked really good and dominant this year. And so Effingham I have at number 1, and it's crazy. And I talked about St. T. Maroa. I think Effingham probably was off my top 5 last week. So to vault them all the way number 1, yeah, they've had a really good season so far.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I dropped my number 1 team out of this. This is the second week in a row I've actually done that. So yeah, mine's we have a lot of the same teams, but in a little bit different order. Okay. I started out with 5, Casey-Westfield. They had the win against Robinson a couple weeks ago, and then they had the close loss to Lawrenceville, who then turned around now and lost to Robinson in a really strange game last week. And then outside of that, there's just not much there to go on with Casey, so that's why I was a little shy to put them up higher. They do have, and they had the game against Newton as well. We don't quite know where Newton is yet. They're 3-3, and they could easily make the playoffs, or they could not make the playoffs with teams like Olney. Left on their schedule. They have another tough one too that I'm not remembering off the top of my head here, but they have a couple tough ones left where they might not make it. Casey also has only left on their schedule, which is going to be a tough game. I don't know. I like Casey, but I'm not quite sure I'm as confident in them as I was to start the season. Number 4, Maroa-Forsyth it makes my list now after seeing them play Monticello last week. They had the loss to Unity, but they played really well in that game. Probably should have won that game, and I really kind of feel like things started there for them, where okay, they played well against a good team. Now they beat a good team. I'm optimistic for them against St. Joseph-Ogden. I'm not going to pick on them to win that game, but I definitely would not be shocked if it happened. And I just like them going forward now. It's not the same Maroa team we've seen in past years, but it is. They still have Jack Hockaday, and that helps. Number 3, I have Arcola. I dropped them a spot, even though they're undefeated. They beat LSA. I just felt like some other teams had bigger wins that kind of vaulted them up. I agree with everything you say about Arcola. Still not necessarily a team that's had a big test. They do have Sangamon Valley is going to be a good one this week, and then they also have, and we just haven't seen the LVC Northwest maybe be quite as good with Cerro Gordo, Arthur, as maybe we thought they were going to be. So that kind of hurts Arcola in these rankings, but I'm sure they're not losing any sleep over that. And they finish with Tri-County, which will be a tough one later this season. So we'll find out more about Arcola late in the season, I think. They could easily be 9-0, though. They really could. Number 2, I have Effingham. Yeah, they weren't even sniffing my rankings. In fact, we had talked a couple weeks ago. We listed a bunch of teams who, could be in the rankings, and I didn't have them on there, and that was a mistake. Right now, their offensive line is playing the best of any team in this area, and that's why I have them number 2. And number 1, I have St. Teresa. I feel like if any team in our area, they have 2 of the best wins this season. They beat Maroa-Forsyth, who now is my number 4 team, and they also beat Sullivan, who I think I could argue was my number 6, and I thought about even having them as my number 5. And I never would have thought I'd have them there, even after, definitely after week 1 after they got blown out by Tolono, but they've got the ship righted. Patrick Altoff has really given them just a winning type player where they feel comfortable going to him in certain situations. And the young Lions has really come together. I thought Jarrett would be the key against Sullivan, and like you said, I think that even made me more impressed with them as well. That I thought if they're going to beat them, Jarrett's going to run past people for Sullivan, and that didn't necessarily happen. And they on a night where the turf, the footing wasn't great, but they were still able to win. So hey, they're my number 1 team now.
Yeah, so now we have, I think, probably of all the conferences, the CIC has the 2 biggest matchups. You have the 4 top teams all playing each other, and it maybe helps sort out this conference a little bit. Now, St. T, is 4-0 in the conference, and Shelbyville, Sullivan, and Tuscola, they're all at 3-1. So we'll start with St. T at Tuscola. And, like we said, St. T's coming off that win against Sullivan, Okaw Valley. And, 2 teams that probably, I would say, Tuscola's probably a little bit more of a passing offense, and St. T's probably a little bit more of a rushing team. So kind of two contrasting styles, maybe a little bit. But I think that for Tuscola, and they were someone who I had on my 6 or 7 here on this list. I think they've had have had a pretty good season. I know they close loss to Sullivan, but I feel like this would be a win to get them back in the conversation. And after that loss to Sullivan, getting them and beating St. T would help go a long way into saying, okay, we're as one of these elite teams. And it's just one of those things where sometimes these teams haven't had it's kind of like Arcola. They're playing their out-of-conference opponents aren't necessarily the strongest. And Georgetown Ridge Farm wasn't any joke that Tuscola beat. But I think this is a win that if Tuscola gets, that would be a really nice statement that they can make.
Yeah, I agree. And I really go back to what you said earlier. I think that you can't – I think in past years it's been really easy to look on paper and say – compare scores and go, okay, this is what's going to happen in that game. And it would come true quite a bit. I think this year – the teams are too close together. Sullivan barely beat Tuscola, and St. Teresa barely beat Sullivan. So, you can say, well, St. Teresa is a little better than Tuscola, but I think in these games, a lot is going to come down to matchups,
right.
Which I think, when you see when the teams aren't very far away talent-wise, it can just be like in the Sullivan-Tuscola game. Tuscola was outplaying Sullivan in the first half. Sullivan found a matchup to exploit in the second half, and they won the game. I really think that both this game and the Shelbyville-Sullivan game, you start looking at that one. Tuscola beat Shelbyville pretty good.
Yeah.
So you say, well, they're better. Sullivan's going to be better than Shelbyville. And I do think Sullivan's, their pass rush could definitely give Shelbyville problems. So I think that was one thing I was really impressed with Sullivan was their pass rush. But I also think that Sullivan's going to have trouble keeping up with some of the athletes Shelbyville has. So I think matchup-wise, and that's what maybe makes this conference so interesting, is just that they're close together, and it's going to come down to just who can exploit a matchup here or there, almost like a kind of a basketball situation where, when one program is just not better, in every way than the other one, that's what the games come down to.
Yeah, there's a lot of coaching that is going into these games rather than just, okay, we know we're better, we'll just, march down the field. I think the one thing I think Tuscola is a similar makeup to Sullivan Ocon Valley, to where you have Bates and Frerichs as really strong quarterbacks who can throw and run. And you saw St. T kind of, Nick Frerichs he ran a little bit but he couldn't pass quite as well as he's had in some previous games. And I think if Bates, maybe he'll have to run a little bit more. But if they get that passing game going, I think that'll be the key. If they can get that going against St. T, who's had a pretty good pass defense this year, I think that might be the key for Tuscola.
Right, and we don't know how weather affected
that,
the Sullivan's game. So that's another thing. You really have to look at the weather more and more with the teams being so close together and styles and different styles and things like that.
So moving on to the Little Ocala Valley, we got Sangamon Valley and Arcola going up against one another. And Arcola, we talked about this, they played really well. They haven't had a close game at all this season. And then go against Sangamon Valley, but they do get it at their home field.
Exactly. I talked to a coach here in the past couple of weeks that does not feel Arcola is unbeatable. They feel like they're really good, but maybe they're not quite as dominant as the scores have shown. The Arthur game was close until late, and they kind of finally just broke through late and put it on them. But Sangamon Valley's played better here in the last couple of weeks since that loss to Arthur, and I don't think that's a gimme for Arcola. I do think Arcola has shown they're the dominant team right now, but Sangamon Valley is sort of that similar style, that physical style. I think it's not going to be a situation where Arcola can just come in and hammer them, because obviously they're a very physical team, and that's one of the reasons they've been so good this year. So I think that's a little more interesting than most people are giving it credit for, but Arcola is obviously the favorite.
Yeah, and we talked about this. Arcola, non-conference schedule hasn't been the greatest. They've had some easier teams, and Sangamon Valley, their line probably sends one of the tougher lines that Arcola's played so far. And Arcola, Clayton Strader's been able to pass the ball well, but he hasn't done it a whole lot. Their attempts, I think it's around 50 to 60. There just haven't been that many. So if that running game does, get pushed back a little bit by Sangamon Valley, I think that's going to have to be maybe leaned on a little bit more. And he's passed, 60% of his passes have been completed so far. I mean, he's played really well, but I think that maybe, if Strader can really open up that passing game, that'll help out a lot against Sangamon Valley. And then we have our St. Joe versus Maroa-Forsyth in Okaw Valley, and this is a game I think everybody's thinking, okay, St. Joe. The number one team in 3A right now, that this is theirs to lose. And, I don't know. They've played some really close games the past couple of weeks, and part of that's because they've had some running backs who have had some injuries that haven't played. And I think what I'm hearing, Ryan Schote is getting closer, and if he does play this game, that's a huge lift for St. Joe. But, you saw Maroa last week, and you saw the improvements they made against Monticello. It's a team that's starting to, put together here as the season's gone on.
Right, and it's been a team that their defense has been much better. I think they're starting to find, what they want to do there. And offensively, I think they're learning that you put the ball in Hockaday's hands and just kind of play off that, keep the ball on the ground, pass when you have to, and they're finding an identity with that. And I think going forward, they're a scary team, and I think St. Joe will have their hands full.
So make sure you check out all our Week 7 action. We're getting here to the end a little bit. So make sure you check out Press Pick'em. We've got a couple weeks left. We'll make sure to do Week 10, the first week of playoffs, so you have an extra week tacked on there at the end. But we'll have that. We'll have a complete coverage of everything in Week 7, so you make sure you check that out in our Preps Wrap. And check back. We'll have photo galleries and everything coming up for this week. So collect all the teams out, and we'll see you out there.